Right, before I delve inside this engine to see what's going on with it, I'm going to have to remove all of the ancillaries. So that's the carburetors, the manifolds, the water pump, the dynamo, the distributor, all the heater valves. Everything's got to come off before we get inside. And I don't think it's going to be very good when I do get in there. Right, carburetors first. Let's see if I can get these off as a pair. Despite them looking so rough, they're probably completely salvageable. Thinking of how I'm going to get to drive this lovely little MGA when it's all done. When it's all done. When it's all done. When it's all done. Right, back to reality. The other thing is, you have to let the engine know who's boss. I'm just gonna say, right, let me tell you, you are coming apart and you're gonna run again. There's no two ways about it. You are going to be overhauled. Okay?
Yeah.
Good. One pipe, stubbornly holding on. There we go. There are our twin carburetors. They'll need a further strip down and rebuilding, but inside, clean as a whistle. Now, I'm coming to the manifold nuts here. I reckon that some of these, especially the ones that have been replaced using a steel nut instead of a brass nut, I reckon they're going to be seized onto the studs. And I want to avoid as much work as possible. So before I try and undo them, I'm just going to tighten them up a little bit. Okay, that's it. So that's just kind of broken the seal, and then hopefully either the nuts will come out with the studs or the nuts will come off on their own. And in fact, here we are. The nut has come off on its own without breaking the stud. Nice little tip. I learned that when I was an apprentice, and it works. Off comes the exhaust manifold. Rocker cover off. There we are. Oh, look at that. It's black and sooty in there. Stinky old oil. My prediction is that this engine is going to be absolutely knackered. And out it comes. The head itself doesn't look too bad. It looks like it's actually had what was known as a decoke. That's when somebody cleaned it up and got all the carbon deposits out from around the valves. It actually looks quite clean. So, having taken a look in the data book, these bores should be a diameter of 2.999 inches across, so basically 3 inches. So now we'll be able to use a bore gauge in there and see how worn they are. So what I've got here is a micrometer set up to 2.999 inches, and then the bore gauge is set, wait a minute, let's just get that bang on, that's set at 0. So I know that that is measuring, when it's on 0 there, it's measuring 2.999 inches. So I'm going to put it into the bore now, and we'll see how worn that bore is. And I can see that that's reading 13 thousandths of an inch. So these cylinders have worn by 13 thousandths of an inch, which means that they're probably going to have to be bored out beyond 20 thou, which would be the next stage, and to 30 thousandths of an inch. That means that we'll get rid of all the rust and debris, and it means that we'll have a nice clean bore all the way round, all the way up, and all the way down. The reason for this engine being seized is simply because it's been sat there and the piston rings have rusted to the cylinder walls. It's just neglect. So the next thing to do is remove the sump. Now the sump is basically like a bath or a bowl full of oil. This stores the lifeblood of the engine. Ooh, and tails of emulsified oil. Right, so out comes the oil pump. Now you'll notice this sieve-like thing, which is a strainer. That prevents, or at least helps prevent, the oil pump from picking up any large bits of debris. So there's the oil pump out, and here you can see when I turn it how oil is drawn in at this point, this widest part, and then as the space gets smaller, it gets squeezed and squished out through this port here, which is the outlet. So here we go. Right, that's the last bearing cap out. Now let's have a look at some of these. Here's numbers 2 and 3. Let's give them a little bit of a wipe. And you can see these bearings have got lots of score marks on them, little impact marks where there's been bits of debris in there, and that would indicate that perhaps this engine has had low oil pressure. So actually it's been running at low oil pressure, so these have been actually hitting against the journals. Really, there ought to be a film of oil separating these bearings from these crank journals here. Okay, right, I can see, so that says 010 US, that means 10,000ths of an inch undersize, which means that the crank has been ground away by 10 thou, and so these bearings are actually a little bit thicker than the originals to meet up with that journal. However, it's going to take a little bit more grinding because I can see some little debris marks in there. Now this is what's known as a 3 bearing crank. So there we go, that's the last main journal out, the centre one. The centre one is slightly different in that it has these 2 thrust washers. Now the thrust washers here are 2 little additional bearing surfaces, and they stop the crankshaft from forward and aft movement, so that's backwards and forwards movement, which would then put strain on the connecting rods, the big end bearings, and it would all go horribly wrong. We should be able to get the crankshaft out. There we are. That is the crankshaft. Now that will have to be measured up, and it's likely that it may need grinding again, but we'll have to see. We'll have to check it over. Looks like it's in for a bit more grinding before it can go back together. If we can get these fellas to move. Ah, there we are. That's one moved. That's another one moved. That one hasn't moved. That one has. Oh, okay. There's the naughty one. It's down here. Number 1. Might have to get that out from the other direction. All in all, this engine will live to run another day. It's going to be rebored, the crank's going to be reground, so it's going to come back with all new sizes, new pistons, new rings. It's going to be, well, pretty much good to go for another 100,000 miles if it's looked after properly.